I was 21, sunburnt and grinning at the world because I had snakes to find and a swamp road all to myself. Herping was the one thing that made everything else feel simple. Drive slow. Watch the shoulders, brake fast, scoop the serpent before a car could flatten it. I had pillowcases in the truck bed with yesterday's finds, each tagged with a mile marker, so I could release them where they belonged. The plan: quick releases, then a slow crawl along that moss-draped artery of cypress and water I knew better than my own neighborhood. I stopped at the only gas station that didn't make my wallet cry, one with stories behind it that weren't great. Sun was still up, people milling about. Safe enough, right? I was halfway through pumping when a beat-up sedan glided in beside me like it belonged to a bad dream. 4 guys inside. Faces like shut doors. The driver leaned out with a smile that said he liked hurting things. "Hey, little boy, I got that morphine." I kept my voice level. "I'm good. That should have been it." But he kept repeating it, pushing the words into me like a thumb against a bruise. "Little boy. Little boy." The way he savored it made my scalp prickle. When I finally snapped and told him to back off, they peeled out tires, screaming, laughter trailing. My adrenaline was still fizzing when the swamp swallowed me up 20 minutes later. I parked at the sand turnout. I always used water on both sides, trees leaning over like an audience. I could hear crickets, the soft slap of something in the shallows, a distant truck on the highway that sounded like a storm. I opened the truck bed and started pulling pillowcases. One bulged heavy with a big, muscular rat snake. It twitched inside, smelling the night. That's when I heard tires crunch behind me. The same sedan idled inches off my bumper. Doors opened. 4 men spread out without talking, like they'd practiced. The driver came straight for me, all muscle and slow grin. The others fanned into the brush, subtle enough to cut off the road and the water's edge. No one said morphine now. It was just, "What up, little boy?" Low, amused, certain. I went cold. The tire iron was in the cab 10 feet, 2 lifetimes away. My hands moved on their own. I grabbed the fattest pillowcase and slid the snake out into the humid air. It didn't hesitate. It ballooned into a tight coil, mouth gaping to show rows of small hooked teeth, tail vibrating hard enough to sound like dry leaves. The hiss was huge, bigger than a non-venomous serpent had any right to be. Everything in the night seemed to pause to listen. The driver flinched, took 1 step back. The snake struck, fast and mean, snapping the leather of his boot with a sound like a knuckle crack. He yelped, stumbled, and that broke whatever spell they'd been working. The others swore and retreated in a tangle of bravado and panic, scrambling for the sedan. Gravel exploded from under the tires. The undercarriage scraped the median with a scream of metal as they fishtailed into the dark. I stood there shaking so hard the snake's body juddered in my hands. It bit me twice, quick, shallow, a reminder to focus, then calmed when I steadied my grip. I released everything fast, my tags fluttering on their pins as each pillowcase went slack, and the body slid back into the brush and black water. When I drove out, I checked my mirror every 15 seconds. For months afterward, I kept the big rat snake's shed in my glove box, like a talisman. Fear faded. Gratitude didn't. I also started keeping the tire iron under my seat, and a spray can by my thigh. And I never stopped at that gas station again, cheap or not. North Wales is pretty in the way postcards are pretty. Stone walls, sheep chewing forever, hills stitched together by gray sky. When you're 15, that much quiet can make you reckless. We went looking for places adults forgot: barn attics, culverts, derelict sheds with calendars stuck open to 1987. One damp evening, we found a manhole cover tucked beside the tracks where the line humped over the road on a flat concrete bridge. It looked wrong there, half buried and neglected, like a mouth trying not to be found. We came back after dark with cheap headlamps and a socket wrench set. The bolts squealed like they hadn't moved in years. The cover was heavier than we expected, and when we shifted it aside, the smell that rose up was cold concrete and stale air, a cellar that never belonged to a house. The ladder rungs were slick with condensation and old rust. At the bottom, a long, narrow passage, cramped enough that hunched shoulders touched both walls. Above us, the thudding passage of a train made dust shiver in the light beams, and a fine rain of grit pepper our hair. We breathed in sync, eyes wider than the lamps could cover. We picked our way forward, crouching in sections where the roof dipped, shoulders scraping wet cement. Halfway through, a vent opening framed the motorway below like a TV set. Headlights slid past soundlessly beneath our feet. For a minute we were just kids suspended above the world, the strangeness of it washing away the claustrophobia. Then the tunnel narrowed again. The air got thicker, sweeter, like old sweat. The chair appeared out of the gloom exactly where your brain doesn't want a chair to be, a fold-up facing a wall at close range. Above it, a page from an old magazine. The woman's body was there, but her eyes had been cut out with care. Two perfect voids, neat edges, taped back on the concrete like a proud project. There were cigarette burns on the chair's arm. A crumpled, crisp packet. And on the ground, a condom knotted at the open end, the latex clouded red. No one made a joke. No one breathed for a second either. Somewhere above us a car rolled over the bridge and the whole passage hummed. Then from the latter end, we heard the scrape of metal, a tiny grind. Like something heavy adjusting, we ran. All at once, clumsy and fast, bashing elbows and knees on edges we'd been careful to avoid on the way in. The ladder rungs felt slicker than before. When my hands hit the manhole lip and I shoved, there was a moment where it didn't move and my heart stopped. Then it slid, and we exploded into night air that smelled like rain and petrol and saved. We didn't tell anyone. Try explaining what exactly to who? There's a secret room with a chair and a picture with the eyes cut out and other things. We avoided the bridge for months. When we finally drove by in broad daylight, the manhole looked sealed and clean. Different bolts. No rust. Sometimes I wake up to the sensation of concrete inches from my face and the cold of air that hasn't been breathed in a long time. In those dreams, something quietly moves the cover back into place, and the light narrows to a coin and then to nothing. I was the kind of 8-year-old who slept with the hall light on and a book half opened on my chest, so I could pretend I wasn't too scared when my mom checked in. I never watched scary movies. Didn't have to. I saw a man outside my window regularly enough, just a dark suggestion past the curtains that sent me burrowing under blankets so tight they could web in armor. One night, I felt the mattress dip. Not much, just the soft give of springs under weight. Fingers combed through my hair like my mother did when I had a fever. Everything in me wanted to clamp my eyes shut and stay statue still, but I looked. He sat perched at the edge of my bed, hands gentle in my hair. Middle-aged, lines around the eyes that living puts there. He wasn't gray, not exactly, but he seemed lit from within, as if someone had replaced the room bulb with warm afternoon sunlight and set it inside his chest. He smiled at me, and whatever fear I'd been carrying for years just stopped. I didn't feel brave. I felt safe, like the word existed because of him. I blinked once, and then I was asleep, deep and easy. Years later, after a move, after 1,000 little transformations that made childhood feel like a distant planet, my mom was sorting through a box she was sure had been lost. "Look," she said, her voice gone soft in a way I didn't hear often. "My dad." She handed me a photo. The man looked up at me from the paper with eyes that smiled first and mouth that followed. Same lines. Same hair, same warmth that didn't come from the camera flash. I knew him. Not from the photo. From that night. I didn't say anything then. It seemed like a private thing. Mine or his, or both. Later, at a family gathering, someone told a story about being alone in the house the night before a big exam and hearing a voice say, "You're all right." Another relative admitted they'd woken once to the smell of pipe tobacco. No one smoked anymore and felt a hand on their shoulder. "Granddad," someone said, quick and certain. Maybe it's memory building a bridge where there wasn't one. Maybe the brain loves a circle too much to resist. But every time I pass a mirror in low light and catch a kinder version of my own face looking back, I think some stories don't need to be scared of the dark to be true. The house sat alone on a prairie like a tooth that outlived the jaw. No neighbors within shouting distance, just wind in the grasses and the low hum of power lines miles away. My friend's parents bought it to flip good bones, they said, even if the bones creaked. We were teenagers with keys to an empty place and a trunk full of snacks. It should have been fun. At first, it was. We claimed rooms as ours, even though no one would ever really live there. We swept floors, we pried up carpet. We joked about ghosts in the daylight and bragged about not believing in them after dark. Then things started to go wrong in the small ways you can explain if you want to. A flashlight flicked on inside a zipped duffel. A light in the entryway turned itself back on after we switched it off and were halfway out the door. We laughed, but it didn't feel like laughing. The barn was padlocked. My friend's parents were strict about it. We had no reason to go in there until the day we found the noose. It hung dead center, orange trimmer cord braided into a loop that looked like someone watched a tutorial. It was an old rope you could blame on history. It was bright, new, and chosen. We cut it down, left it coiled like a dead snake on the floor. The next week it was back, same knot, same beam. No one had the key but adults. No one confessed. After a barbecue night, we snuffed the coals like responsible kids and dropped the lid. A week later, black comet tails of ash trailed across the deck in lines like someone had carried handfuls of smoldering charcoal and spilled them in artful arcs. The grill lid was still down, cool and locked. The wood bore scorch kisses that hadn't become a fire only because luck had stayed awake. We started making rules we never admitted were rules. No staying past midnight. No drinking, always a sober driver. Never be alone in a room if you could help it. Then the flashlight thing escalated. A guy tossed his bag onto the living room floor and it started blinking in there an SOS through nylon. We unzipped it, the light stopped. We zipped it, it started again. It did this twice more, like it was waiting for the cue to perform. Everyone got quiet enough to hear the house tick. I didn't go back after that, neither did a few of us. The ones who kept going said the place got meaner, new paint bubbled for no reason. A brand new door swelled and stuck even in dry weather, screws backed themselves out of hinges like teeth loosening. The day it burned, nobody was there. Fire investigators shrugged toward wiring as if that word could cover everything. The frame collapsed on itself like a sigh. Sometimes there are spaces that decide we read the intruders long after we've forgotten why they were empty to begin with. The prairie grew tall over the foundation the next spring. No one mowed it. My dad is a park ranger in a town so small the grocery store sells fishing lures behind the register. When I visit, we end up where maps turn into green patches with lake names and contour lines like fingerprints. On one trip, we took a canoe across a big, quiet lake rimmed by cliff spruce crowding the top like spectators. There was a break in the rock, an opening where water poured inland like a river. The ravine cut straight into the cliff face, walls shouldering in. The deeper we paddled, the more the sound changed. Echoes got strange, like everything we did had someone else doing it a second later. My dad loved it. I kept thinking about the way stone holds cold. At the end, the ravine opened into a shallow bog surrounded by lower rock walls. One section on our right had slumped enough that we could beach the canoe and scramble up. Under the leaning arm of an old tree, the rock formed a natural patio flat and broad, dry even with the bog breathing around it. The campsite looked like a party had happened, and the party had ended badly. Charred logs were scattered far from the fire ring as if someone had thrown them in a hurry. A black smear streaked up the rock wall where something hot had hit and burst. There wasn't a tent, but there were belongings people don't abandon: a decent pair of hiking boots, a fleece jacket, a metal cooler with the lid sprung open and empty. I made the mistake of peering over the ledge, where the rock dropped 20 feet back to the dark water. Down there, sitting like it had been placed gently at the bottom, was a camp chair, the old kind with crisscrossing nylon straps. Perfectly good. Perfectly wrong down there. My stomach did a slow flip and I stepped back too quickly. The edge had a way of tugging you forward with your own curiosity. We went back to the canoe. The swamp beyond was clogged with old, submerged logs. After a while, my dad had to use his paddle like a hook, pulling us along instead of pushing. The water was shallow enough to show what slept there. Pale wood, smooth stones, the ghosts of campfires drowned by time. And then, under a break of cloudy water, a pole. Long, carved. I didn't have the word then, but later I would. Totem. Faces nested on faces. Features smoothed by years, color long gone. It lay half buried, as if the swamp had rolled over to keep it. I didn't point it out, I didn't need to. My dad saw it, and he nodded once, a small, quiet acknowledgement. We didn't touch it. We didn't linger. On the paddle back out, the ravine felt narrower. The campsite stayed in my head. The panicked scorch on stone, the chair sunk below the lip, the things you don't leave unless you have to. We reported the abandoned gear, because that's what you do. I still wonder what made those people run and why the swamp was allowed to keep the rest. Our driveway ran a quarter-mile through corn and timber before it curled past the barn and into the yard. At night the place turned into a maze of metal silhouettes and black tree lines. The kind of darkness that convinced you things were watching you even if they weren't. We made a game of it. Hide-and-seek that used the whole property. My parents were in on the bit. Find her if you can. They'd tell anyone who knocked. One summer evening, a friend's headlights bumped down the washboard gravel. Another friend was already with me. We split into shadows the second the car turned in. She slipped into an outbuilding. I sprinted for the far trees and dropped into a clutch of bushes where the grass was matted flat from deer. The dirt smelled like rain and old iron. I settled my breathing, grinning at the idea of bursting out at the perfect moment. Then I heard it, not my own breath, not the tiny, jittery pulls of someone hiding. This was slow, measured, close enough that the leaves in front of my face trembled. I waited for a whisper, a laugh, anything human. There was nothing but the careful inhale, the longer exhale, like someone checking the dark for answers. My grin vanished. The cold moved into my chest in a way that had nothing to do with air temperature. I didn't bolt. I stood up instead, stretching, fake casual, brushing dirt from my legs like I'd just gotten bored. I walked toward the light like I knew exactly where I wanted to be. Nothing lunged, nothing spoke, the breathing stopped. That night, every crinkle of a plastic bag sounded like footsteps. Every cow low carried a warning I couldn't decode. Around midnight, my dad stepped onto the porch with a flashlight and stood there a long time, beam skating the fence line, then shook his head and came inside. In the gray of morning, one of our cows lay in the pasture with her belly open clean and pieces missing. The cuts were tidy, purposeful. Coyotes don't bring knives. We called the sheriff. He shrugged toward poachers with the weary resignation of someone who's seen a few things and can't approve any of them. It's been years. Sometimes I will be walking past a line of trees and feel the space between trunks press in, just for a second. I still don't know if whoever was breathing that night saw me stand up and decided I wasn't what they wanted, or if I was and they changed their mind. The South Australian interior doesn't forgive. It doesn't even notice. We were a small team dropping water caches for a long traverse later in the season, blue barrels stashed like breadcrumbs across empty space. The spinifex was everywhere, stiff and eager to embed its spines in anything soft. By the second day, Joel had fallen into a bush of it and looked like a walking pin cushion. The laughter tasted like heat too bright, too brittle. Orb weavers moved in with the evening. Big ones. Webs strung between shrubs we swore were too far apart to connect. Silken lines, so strong they clung like tape. Twice I walked face first into a net and gagged on the thought of what wasn't tea in my mouth, but felt like it was. We started carrying sticks and sweeping like cautious blind men. On day 4. The map, a single water-stained sheet we borrowed from a retired surveyor, who claimed it was good enough, suggested a direct descent into a valley that would shave hours. It led us to the lip of what used to be a waterfall, now a dry, bleached throat. The drop was a straight 300 feet into broken rock. Heat shimmered and warped the basin below, so it looked like water until you remembered it wasn't tea. Joel crouched to retie a lace, and a brown snake slid past his calf like a drawn line. He didn't move. None of us did. The snake rode itself into the grass and disappeared, and we remembered how far a chopper was and how short an anavenum line might be in the ledger of a day. We turned to double back. That's when we heard rockfall. Not the clatter of a dislodged chunk tumbling a face. These were small taps and tiny skitters, like footfalls trying not to be footfalls. I told myself it was goats. I told myself a lot of things. Then a stick snapped too close. In the corner of my eye, a crouch, a shape low to the ground, watching. I lifted my binoculars. Nothing. The orb weavers were thicker than beards on the shrubs at dusk. After midnight, they were gone. How do dozens of big-bodied spiders vanish between turning your head and looking back? That's when the whispering started. Not words I recognized. Not even language. Maybe just human cadence without content, like a conversation you couldn't quite overhear. The sound moved around us like a slow circle, stopping when we spoke, starting when we listened. One of the guys went quiet, then quieter, then made a small sound and curled onto his side. I smelled urine and didn't say anything. I didn't turn on my light. I didn't want to put shape to anything. At dawn, the ridge felt like any other piece of rock, old, indifferent. We packed fast, abandoning the last cache we'd meant to set. The map creased, damp, stained, was gone. Joel swore he'd tucked it in his side pocket. We turned out every bag, shook the tent. Nothing. Back at base, we tried to redraw the section from memory. I sketched the symbol we noticed the night before, the one that didn't. T belong on a surveyor-ass work. A circle inside a triangle. 3 little prongs at the top like antlers. No one in the office recognized it, or they didn't want to. We didn't go back. There are places that make you feel uninvited without a word. There are nights that never finish ending. There are lakes up north that look like mirrors dropped and shattered into 1,000 perfect pieces, with narrow channels between rock faces where wind goes to rest. I'd been working long shifts and paddled out alone after dark on water, so still it held the stars like a second sky. The headlamp halo felt unnecessary, so I switched it off. The world shrank to paddle dips and the soft hiss of the canoe sliding. I found the island by accident. It rose from the water like a broad-backed animal, a low hump of trees and rock. It wasn't on my map, or if it had a different name than the one it used that night. It was late. The shore was a neat shelf of granite that made landing easy. I hauled my gear just past the tree line and put the tent up by feel. Morning had that first sharpness of fall. I unzipped the tent and stretched and saw it, a mound 30 feet away, a shape that belonged in a graveyard more than a forest. Maybe 3 feet high, 6 long, bones, not scattered, not gnawed in a predator's den pattern, stacked and placed with the attention of a builder. Long bones aligned, ribs making a kind of lattice, vertebrae like pale coins in a row. No moss, no dead leaves clotted in the gaps. Clean in a way that nature rarely leaves things unless someone encourages it. I walked a slow circle around it, every step more deliberate than the last. I didn't touch it. The air felt like it held its breath with me. I tried to conjure an ordinary explanation. Hunters? No. This wasn't waste. Ceremony? The word felt silly and right at the same time. The silence had a tilt to it, like sound was bending around a center I couldn't see. For a second, I had the vertiginous sense that I'd camped amidst something ongoing. That I'd climbed into a story mid-chapter without an invitation. I broke camp without making breakfast. Back on the water, I checked the map again. The island wasn't there, or it was, but nothing about the contours matched. On later trips, I tried to find it again on purpose. The lake refused to show me the same face twice. Every now and then, paddling in the evening, I'll catch a wedge of shadow that looks like a low island. I don't land. I don't need to know if the bones are still there to believe they are. There are days in the Blackstone Range when the fog turns the world into a box you carry around your head. I set out to summit Mount Calm and ended up changing plans twice because plans are a joke in weather like that. By the time I was navigating Hollow Path Ridge, my legs were jelly and the granite was slick as buttered glass. The trail is generous. It's a rumor of a route is just stacked boulders with ankle-eating gaps between them. Handholds were wet. Lichen made everything treacherous. I kept hearing my own voice in my head, patient and annoying. Don't get hurt alone. Don't get hurt alone. The fog was so thick I could taste a cold mineral, a little like an old basement. I looked up and saw a shape, the size of a small car where the ridge dipped and rose. Again, black, rounded. The right kind of squat and low to be a bear. I froze with my boot half on a sloping rock and felt my balance go precarious and absurd. I shouted because that's what you're supposed to do. The sound went nowhere, ate itself in the fog, like it was embarrassed to be heard. I waited, counting heartbeats. The shape didn't move. I moved closer and it didn't move. Closer still, and I started laughing because it was a big, upturned stump with roots clawing at nothing. The bark was scarred by fire, so it drank the light and threw back a bear instead. I sat and let the adrenaline bleed off until my hands stopped shaking. That's when the marmot appeared from a crack like an angry landlord and started screaming at me. It did the little stomp they do when they're serious. I apologized to a rodent. Out loud. Twice. By the time I dropped below the fog, the stump bear had turned into a good story instead of a bad feeling. One useful thing I kept. When you're cold, wet, and hungry, your brain puts costumes on inanimate objects. Sometimes the scariest thing you see is your own conviction. We packed up after midnight, just the creak of the cooler and the snick of tackle boxes closing to mark the end of it. The field we had to cross to reach the car was a wide, low bowl of grass with a tree line that didn't look any closer no matter how fast you walked. No trail, no lights. Only our flashlights throwing narrow rivers ahead of our boots. The eyes appeared all at once because that's how our lights found them, 2 at a time, then 4, then a dozen pairs reflecting back, low to the ground, too steady to be fireflies. They formed a polite crescent, 30 yards away maybe, as if they'd arranged themselves to watch 2 idiots with stringers. We stopped. The air felt like a held note. I swept my light slowly and saw the eyes blink in rhythm, going dull and shining again as pupils tried to ruin our advantage. The bodies behind the eyes were invisible, gray against gray. Coyotes. A lot of them. Enough to make the hairs on my arms lift. We walked. Not fast, not slow enough to show fear. Every few steps we checked the crescent. It didn't advance, and then, when it did, it wasn't at us. It flowed sideways and outward and behind. The way water finds a path you didn't know was lower. The grass crackled in short bursts all around as feet moved through it. We had been inside their circle for longer than we'd realized. 50 yards out, something changed. Some decision passed down a line none of us could see. The eyes went from watching to gone in a breath, scattering, disappearing into the tall grass with the soft rush of fur against stalks. The quiet slapped back into place. At the car, we closed the doors like they were gates. We sat there, windows up, breath fogging, laughing a little too loud. If even one of them had decided we smelled like a good test, the rest would have followed. Coyotes aren't wolves, but they don't need to be. Northern Canada in February is how you learn the alphabet of dark. Even 6 in the evening is midnight if the sky wants it. I was filling a slip tank in the back of my truck with diesel for the side broom at the far end of a pipeline project. The pump's growl was so loud it felt like it was rubbing the bones in my ears. I had that feeling you get when eyes land on the back of your neck. I flicked the pump off. Silence hit hard enough to make my head ring. Nothing moved. I told myself I was 28, not 8, and hit the pump again. I was about to mock myself out loud when my headlights picked up 2 bright marbles on top of the dirt pile we'd made pushing earth aside for the line. The eyes were set far enough apart to let my body understand what my brain was slow to acknowledge. A cougar stood like a painting, muscles relaxed, tail tip twitching. Cats decide, that's what they do. It had been watching me long enough to weigh me against whatever it had already eaten and whatever it hadn't. In one flex of its haunches, it dropped from the pile and vanished into the dark like the dark had been waiting to take it back. When we came back in daylight, I walked the site with my heart in my throat and my eyes everywhere. The tracks told a clear story whether you wanted to read it or not. It hadn't slid down that pile. It hadn't tiptoed. It had launched. 30 feet from dirt lip to ground, no prints on the slope. It had been above me, coiled and ready. I still don't love the dark. People laugh when I say it. I don't argue. I just remember those eyes hanging in my headlights like distant stars, and I feel how thin the moment was between being alone and being prey. I'd been driving survey lines for hours, red dust like a promise on the horizon that never arrived. The outback has a way of blurring distance until you don't trust how far anything is. In the distance, a vertical line cut the sky at an angle you'd don't get from scrub or dead trees. I turned the ute and bumped across stunted saltbush and dry creek scars to see. It wasn't a post. It was a metal spike hammered deep. Impaled on it from hindquarters toward the mouth was a dog. Not a dingo. The shape wasn't right. A station dog maybe. Or someone's that had roamed too far. The skin was pulled tight and leathery from sun. The body swollen once and shrunk now into itself. The wind made the whole thing sway. Just a little. Flies were a living curtain. The mind is a stupidly generous friend at first. It reaches for anything that isn't the truth. An art piece, a hunter's mark, a warning sign for feral animals. But nothing made it smaller. Someone had done this. In a place no one would stumble upon by accident. With time to spare. I took photos because that's what you do when you need someone else to see the thing, or it want to be real. I called my boss. He called the police. I gave coordinates and waited longer than I wanted to for someone to tell me to wait longer. When no one did, I left. I checked my mirrors for a while after, even though there was nothing out there to tail me but dust. They never followed up, or if they did the follow-up, never made it to me. On later runs, I skirted that area without meaning to. I told myself it was because the track was better elsewhere. The truth is simpler. The outback is big enough to hold one monster and never make you meet them. Or 2, or 10. That day felt like finding a note in a language you didn't read, pinned to a door that had no hinges. I keep the photos on a hard drive I don't open. I don't need to look to know they're as bad as memory says. Blackroot Valley is where the sky feels like it is pressing its whole weight down on the earth at night. I camped alone because I like the kind of quiet you only get when no one else is around to make noise. My old dog came with me because she Dee got me through more than one bad patch, and because she gave the kind of comfort you don't have to explain. We hiked at dusk, ate early, and crawled into the tent when the temperature slid. I slept. Somewhere in the untime of the night, she growled low and then put all four paws across me like a brace. The growl built into a bark I didn't know she had. Not warning, not conversation, anger and fear braided into something like a wall. The smell followed, rot thick enough to taste. Not dead mouse behind the wall rot. Not, oh God, something crawled into the crawl space rot. This was copper and garbage and sweet in a way that made my mouth water and my stomach want to get out. I lay there under her weight while she told the night to back up. Every nerve said, do not unzip. Do not look. Do not move. I thought about the food ID cooked under the vestibule once in Black Bear country like that was normal everywhere, and how scent is a language other animals read fluently. Time stretched until it felt like muscle fibers starting to tear. The smell thinned. Her bark stepped down to growls, then to watchfulness. She stayed across me a long while after the air cleared, eyes locked on the tent fabric like she could see through weave and shadow both. At dawn, the ground said nothing had been there. No prints in the duff, no overturned rock. Nothing but our breath in the cold. I packed with hands that didn't quite obey me and felt shame about leaving behind the smallest trash scrap, like the forest would hold it against me. Years later, I can still feel the pressure of her weight across my ribs and hear the shape of the thing she was talking to without words. She's gone now. When I think of her, I remember all the soft, good things, and I remember that night when she decided I was hers to defend and did. I do maintenance on broadcast towers, those lonely red blinking toothpicks on ridgelines that live in the wind. One winter afternoon, I hiked a service road up to a 1,200-foot stick to swap a failing feed line. Base shed was padlocked the way I'd left it a month before. Power was supposed to be off at the cabinet. I keyed my handheld to test a dummy load and said, "Check 1 2. Check 1 2, came back my voice, same cadence, half a second delayed. I froze. The transmitter was dead. The studio link was offline for scheduled maintenance. No one should have heard me. I tried again on a different frequency. Tower 3 test. Tower 3 test came back with a breath at the end that wasn't mine. I told myself I was catching some weird atmospheric skip ducting, inversion layer, whatever explanation let me climb the ladder without thinking about who else was up there. At the platform, the wind hit hard enough to make the steel hum. Boots on steel rung, then, above me, another clank. I stopped. The sound stopped. At the top, the dish gleamed like an ice-slick moon. No one. No fresh prints in the frost but mine. I swapped the feed, worked faster than I should have, hands numb. Something flapped and snapped, and I nearly pitched over the safety line before I realized it was a length of duct tape stuck on a guide wire. My name was black markered across it in my handwriting. I don't keep tape up there. Back at the base, I keyed the radio one more time. Final test. Leaving the site, my voice returned, warm with a delay, and then a whisper rode the end of it. Already did? I locked the shed and started for the truck. Halfway down, I checked my own boot prints in the hard snow out of habit. A second set followed with mine to the ladder and stopped at the rung. No prints away. Just ended. Like someone climbed without touching the ground. I don't do night calls at that tower anymore. Daylight only, radios off on the road down. I was running supply across an ice road at dusk, a flat white world that made every low bump look like a mountain until you hit it. Headlights punched tunnels and blowing crystals. 10 miles out, I saw a warm square of light off to the right. A house. On the lake. On footings. I slowed. There were tire tracks leading toward it and a faint path of prints. The closer I got, the stranger it felt. No power lines. No generator sound. Just a yellow glow that made the snow look like sugar around it. I idled 50 yards out, window down, listening. Nothing, no dog, no human scrape, not even the usual ice groan. The hair on my arms lifted. I put the truck back in gear and told myself I'd swing by on the way back in case someone needed help. On the return, maybe 40 minutes later, the house was gone. Not lights off. Gone. In its place, a black widening in the ice, a pool of open water steaming in the cold. My tire tracks from the first pass ran right to the edge and U-turned like a neat little signature. I sat there a long time with the heater too hot and my teeth still clicking. In the morning, the foreman said a pressure ridge had blown out around mile 10 overnight, like the lake had exhaled. I didn't tell him about the warm yellow light, or the way it made me feel like a moth almost doing what moths do forever. There's a lava tube an hour out from where I live, no tours, no signage. Just a GPS pin from a friend and a warning about getting lost. I went alone because I'm an idiot sometimes. The entrance is a crack in black rock that swallows you by degrees until your headlamp is the only thing keeping the world the size you want it. Inside, the air is cool, old. The floor is broken Roby basalt with shin-eating gaps. I marked my way with chalk, simple arrows on smooth sections just in case. 100 yards in, I found boot prints overlaying dust and old guano, fresh edges. Not mine. They led deeper than I planned to go. I followed them because curiosity beats good sense in confined spaces. The prints stopped at a pocket where the ceiling dipped low. Someone had stacked dead headlamp batteries into a neat little cairn, brand mismatches piled like a shrine. I turned off my light to listen just for a second, just to feel it. The dark came down like a hand. Somewhere ahead, faint and deliberate, something tapped. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks again. I snapped the light back on, and the beam jittered with my breathing. The chalk arrow I'd drawn on my way in pointed toward the knock. A second arrow had been added next to it. Different pressure, pointing back. I didn't draw that one. On the way out, the air felt closer, humid with my own panic. At the mouth, the daylight looked like a painting. I turned to make sure my last chalk mark was there, and my heart climbed into my mouth. Every arrow I'd left had been smudged out with the side of a hand. Every single one. The battery cairn clinked once in the dark behind me like someone's shoe nudged it. I sealed the coordinates in a file labeled Geology. I pretend I don't know where it is, so I never have to prove I am brave or not. I was bikepacking across prairie, the long kind where towns are suggestions and the wind is a person. After sunset, I rolled into an old highway picnic, pull out one concrete table, a dead soda machine, a payphone with its guts hanging out like an autopsy. I pitched a bivy behind a low hedge and ate peanut butter with a plastic spoon. Just as I started to drift, the payphone rang. Crisp, bright, like a movie. I waited for it to stop. It didn't. I stood up in my socks and walked to it because that's what you do in a bad decision. The phone line dangled cut. The handset was cold. I picked up anyway and said, "Hello?" A man's voice came through, breathy, hurried. "Don't hang up. 2 minutes." A truck without lights. "Get off the slab." I set the handset down like it weighed 100 pounds and shuffled backward into the shadow of my hedge. A minute later, a pickup rolled in with its lights off until the last second, then clicked them on like a trick. 2 guys got out and walked a slow loop. They didn't look drunk. They looked like they'd lost something they expected to find. One of them stopped near my bike and stared out past me like his eyes could pull me into focus. The other tested the soda machine with a palm slap. They talked low enough that I couldn't catch words, and then they left. The phone started ringing again. I didn't answer it. At first light, I packed everything like I'd never been there. On the next town's library payphone, which actually had a cord, I dialed my own voicemail to see if I could explain what had happened to myself. All I could think over and over was how the voice had said 2 minutes, not a minute, not eventually. Like he'd been me once in that same dumb hedge. We kayaked along a rocky coast where the cliffs drop right into water green as wine bottle glass. There's an old decommissioned lighthouse on a spit out there, gray stone. Boarded windows, the kind of place you tell ghost stories about because the real story is boring paperwork. Fog came in fast around dusk, and as we hugged shore looking for a tiny beach to drag up on, a clean white beam cut through the murk. We both saw it. It swung slow, painted the fog, then slid away. "They're lighting it for weather," my partner said, but her voice sounded like a question. We made for the base and found the door chain, same rusted padlock in the same place I'd seen last summer. The Fresnel lens that should have been in the lantern room had been hauled to a museum years ago. No power lines, no generator. The iron stairs inside were visible through broken glass, a spiral of shadows and birds' nests. In the morning the fog burned off. Seaweed ladders draped the low rocks like hair. Wet footprints bare, long, the heel marked strangely led from the waterline to the door and then vanished. Vanished like they'd chosen to, not like the tide erased them. We didn't mention the light again, because saying it made it something I'd have to think about when the living room was quiet and the windows were reflecting more inside than out. On the paddle back, I couldn't shake the sense the beam wasn't for ships at all. It felt like something was checking if anyone was still out there to see it. I'm the night custodian at a rural K-12 where the gym is larger than the town hall and the parking lot sees more deer than cars after dark. The building has those old service tunnels beneath it, low concrete corridors for steam pipes and mains, with hatch access and custodial closets. They smell like damp chalk. Around 10 p.m. one Tuesday, I heard singing while I was mopping the elementary hall. Faint at first, then clearer as I got closer to the boiler room. Child voices, a choir, not contemporary rounds, harmonies, the kind you hear in old recordings. I thought someone had Bluetoothed D to a speaker in the cafeteria again and made a note to unplug everything. The cafeteria was dark and silent. The singing came again directly below my feet. I unlocked the hatch and slid down the ladder into tunnel air that made my teeth ache. The pipes throbbed. The light hummed. The singing carried clean as if they were at the end of the hall. I walked toward it, flashlight cutting slices. The tunnel dead-ended in a bricked-up arch I'd seen 100 times. The singing stopped like I'd arrived late to a queue. In the dust by my boot, I noticed little lines shoes, small ones like something had turned and turned in place until the dust recorded it. I didn't write that down on my nightly sheet. I left the hatch closed for a week. The following Monday, I found a crumpled paper program in the Lost and Found. Winter Concert, 1979. The set list matched what I'd heard. I laughed at myself in the supply closet where no one could hear. That night, the pipes gurgled a familiar melody when the heat came on, and my skin pulled tight all over. I no longer take the tunnels for shortcuts. I also no longer leave the cafeteria Bluetooth on. Both truths feel like superstition. Both make my nights easier to live with. I did a season in a fire lookout tower, alone with a radio and a map bigger than my kitchen table. After a while you learn how smoke behaves, how wind peels it flat, how heat columns it up. Late August, alpine still as a held breath, I saw a thin ribbon rise from a notch in the far valley. No wind, it went straight up like a string. Then it winked out. 17, maybe 18 minutes, and it started again. The notch was farther and steeper than it looked, because everything is. When I finally broke out into it, there was no fire scar. There was a black ring of ash, precise as compass work, and 3 stacks of stones inside it, each a different height. No heat in the ash. It sifted through my fingers like old flour. My radio hissed and squealed when I tried to call in the location, then went dead, then came back with my own call sign said back to me by someone who wasn't to me. I packed out fast, the way you do when a storm is coming, even if the sky is blue. Back at the tower, the column didn't show again. I told myself I was tired and the brain makes patterns it finds satisfying. On my last week, a different lookout 2 peaks over called in a weird little repeater smoke with the same rhythm. I didn't sleep much that night. I don't work towers anymore. I still look at the horizon every evening, like it's a screen I left paused somewhere. There's an abandoned orchard out past the county line, rows of old pears gone feral, trees lopsided under their own neglect. I went to shoot it at golden hour because rotting fruit and long light make great pictures. A wrought iron gate, the expensive kind, sagged at the entrance. A chain looped around it, but didn't bother with a lock. Something metallic clinked behind the first row as I stepped through like a chain against a stake. A dog, I thought. Hey, buddy, I called. No answer except for flies. The ground was slick with fallen pears, sweet rot thick enough to coat your tongue. I moved slow. Between the trees I found bone. Not one-piece piles. Small ones, neat, almost tidy assemblies. Rabbit, bird, possum, ribs fanned like pale leaves. Skulls set on top, as if someone had finished a puzzle and wanted you to see the picture. The piles repeated in a pattern I couldn't place until I climbed one row and looked down, 5-pointed, patient as math. That's when the chain clinked again, closer this time. I called out louder, skirting a slop of fruit. The smell of copper slipped beneath the sugar. The dog chain lay on the ground next to a stake. One end had been cut clean. The dirt around it was churned, not by paws. Boot treads. Pressure marks. A drag line pointing away from the gate into the deeper dark of the orchard. I backed out the way I came in, stepping where I had stepped, trying not to breathe too much of the orchard into myself. The gate chain was looped tighter around the post than it had been when I arrived. I don't believe in gates moving by themselves. I also don't believe I tightened it. I didn't get any good photos. None I want to look at anyway. Sometimes when I cut an apple, I get a whiff of pear and my stomach just drops. If you hike Scotland long enough, you end up in a bothy. A stone shelter in the middle of nowhere kept up by people who love the idea of other people not dying. I got caught between storms on a long traverse and ducked into one by a lock that looked like a black coin. The fireplace was swept. The sleeping platforms were tight with old wool smell. On the table lay a ledger and a pencil. I signed my name, date, and a little note about the weather, because that's what you do. Flipped back through entries to read about lambing season and broken boots and cheers to whoever left the whiskey. A page fell open on my surname, my name below it. Same handwriting as mine. Tomorrow's date. Wind took a long, low run at the walls. I laughed, made a mental note about how similar everyone's block letters look when they half-frozen and hunched over a damp table. I made tea. Outside, the light thinned like someone diluted it. I fed kindling until the fire was talking to itself. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the boggy yard, that specific slop and suck of peat. I sat up and waited for the latch. It didn't lift. The steps moved past the small window. I didn't go to it. In the morning, there were no prints anywhere, just wind-rippled slick mud. I checked the ledger before I left. A new note below my entry. Thanks for the soup. Slept well. I hadn't made extra. I hadn't seen anyone. I checked my food bag anyway. One packet of soup was lighter than it should have been. Half the powder clumped in the bottom like it got damp in steam. I left a small bottle in the corner cupboard because that's the kind of place it is. I didn't sign my name again. It was already there. There's a river crossing up north with an old cable ferry that only runs in summer. In winter, the chain just sits, and the barge is moored crooked. Deck collecting snow. The whole thing like a metal animal asleep. I was coming back from a logging road job in February. Last bit of light turning the world tin. I pulled into the empty lot to stretch because the radio had been a headache for hours. Something clanked out on the water, the chain. I walked to the bank and squinted. The ferry was sliding out into the current like someone had cranked it, black barge scraping thin ice aside in little Arctic sighs. No operator in the shack, no engine sound. It moved slow and straight until it reached midstream, then angled itself, like a thing that knew the river. It bumped my side bank and stopped, kissing the pilings like it had remembered where they were. Wet footprints showed on the deck, bare, wide. They led from the far side across and stopped at the bow where a car gate would drop in summer. The cable creaked above me, a low groan. I took a step back without meaning to. The ferry sat for a while, the river pushing against it like a big hand. Then it eased itself back out, turned and slid home to the far bank, as if whatever business it had here had finished. The operator shack stayed dark. My radio hissed and then cleared like someone had let go of a stuck mic. 2 days later, the newspaper in town ran a short piece about a local who passed peacefully in their sleep in a house that faced the ferry landing. I don't connect things that don't say aloud they're connected. I also haven't stretched my legs at that crossing since.